So this example comes from a little earlier in my career when I was at Microsoft. And at the time, I was working a lot in the Bing division. And one of the things that Bing had is sort of part of, search engines in general is translation, right? Translation between languages. So Bing, like others, had a sort of ability for speakers of a language to contribute to that large language model. So the behavior that we want is for people to start contributing to the Bing translator. We're going to measure unique contributors to that Bing language index. And so I now know what I want. I want people to contribute. I start talking, across the categories to the people who are doing it. And where we saw really interesting stuff from the started group was where we had added languages. Every time we added a language, particularly a language that was very identity relevant for people, we saw this influx of people into the translation system. And because many people who are bilingual are also trilingual or quadrilingual or speak even more languages, each one of those people that we got in actually contributed to a lot of different language models, but their initial entree was often a sort of identity relevant model. So the idea was, how do we get people onto this system using something that's fun, something that they care about, and then we can move them between languages, we can get them to contribute more broadly. So the idea that we hit upon was creating this novel promoting pressure, which was, there was a Star Trek movie coming out. And so we happened upon this idea of, all right, well, what if we got people to translate Klingon? Now, this is an interesting proposition. It's not practical. It's not going to help anybody. Remember how I said that engineers sometimes struggle to come up with these kinds of interventions? Well, this is one where people might have struggled because they went, why would we add Klingon? But the reality is the Klingon speaking community is highly, highly passionate. And so they were very, very engaged users. And so this also gave us kind of an interesting opportunity in the world because Klingon is a created language. So rather than other kinds of language models where you can have kind of common structures, every language in the world, for example, has a way to say hello. Klingon doesn't really have hello. It was created by a linguist named Mark Okran. And if you watch the first season of Star Trek, all the Klingons speak English. And so it was actually created, once they had a bigger budget, for the movies. And so they employed this linguist, and the linguist said, well, I want to break all of the rules of terrestrial languages. And so what I've decided to do is make Klingon as alien as I can. So there are no things like, how do you say hello? Instead, hello in Klingon tends to be, what do you want? If you come up to somebody and just say, hello is, what do you want? How to make sense given the Klingon personality. So it was an interesting idea to translate something that was a created language, and that hadn't really been done before at scale. So it's really novel. And remember, novelty can be a strong promoting pressure. And we had this movie to hang it off to. So the folks in tech said, yeah, we can do this thing. Now, there were lots of inhibiting pressures I would have loved to reduce, but it just turns out contributing to a language model is hard. And we didn't want to invest a ton of engineering resources into, we would have had to overhaul the whole system to make it dramatically easier to contribute. So we have kind of forced towards that promoting pressure. That happens sometimes. There are business considerations, where you have your resources, this is the thing we could do, right? And there were some folks that had been playing with this sort of kinds of translation and had come to us and said, hey, we have this idea, we have this thing. Okay, great. Let's start to build things around it. And so this was a really fascinating pilot because it enabled us to activate something in an environment and in a moment in time. It wasn't something that we could do permanently, right? It wasn't something that we could repeatedly do over and over and over. You only get to launch this language once, but it gave up a playbook to create other languages. And so we went to the Star Trek premiere. We actually partnered with the movie so that at the premiere, at the beginning when it tells you to shut off your cell phone, we actually had a Klingon symbol slide, and then we had someone say it in Klingon. It turned out the world's best Klingon speaker happened to be an engineer at Microsoft, so we got him to come with us to the premiere and record this audio clip, and then I downshifted it so it sounded very gruff and in this deep voice, and it said, shut off your cell phones, and then we translated it, and people got t-shirts that said Bing Translator. We set up a booth at the after party where people could come and play with translation. We installed it on phones so people could get things translated in and out of Klingon, and we had this engineer with us so he could speak Klingon, and then we could show that the phone was translating it. So we could do all of these little micro interventions to get people involved. And we had really big results from this. At the time, and still, Google was the dominant search engine. And so if you're an engineer in the Bing group, you get pretty used to hearing that Google is the dominant search engine. This was an opportunity to beat Google at something. I remember Mashable, I think, put out an article that it was like Bing beats Google to translating created language. That was not the kind of headline you usually got. It was really motivating for a lot of engineers. And so again, this is a really interesting example of how something moves through the process and creates this moment. And of course, then the language model started to translate other things, Elvish, Tolkien-based Elvish, and all sorts of other things. And now with machine learning and artificial intelligence and all the other kinds of interesting ways that we're approaching this now, it's laughable to think about these really early ways of getting people to contribute to language models well over 10 years ago. But it really makes me smile. Plus, I got to go to the Star Trek premiere. I shaved Klingon into my head. I sat right in front of Leonard Nimoy, and he joked that he should give me a haircut into Vulcan. I got to have this great experience, and so it sticks really memorably for me. Being an applied behavioral scientist is fun. You'll have all sorts of really interesting experiences if you open yourself up to trying on projects that are new and different and trying to create behaviors that are quite hard, like contributing to a language model.